to thank, first of all, the participants who joined our session in this interesting session, where we have invited professionals of our business who are ready to share their expertise with the participants. Those who sit far away from the scene, you may want to get closer, so we make another step towards each other, and maybe it will be more cozy environment, a closer environment, if I may. Our panel discussion is going to be conducted in hybrid mode because one of the participants is going to join us online, remotely. Can you please advise whether our speaker has joined? Yes, he did. Okay, we are all set up, and let me start with the introduction. Let me introduce our speakers. Will we be able to see the speaker? First of all, I would like to point that we have Peter Marro joining us online. He's advisor and head of client solutions team of the Central and West Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank. Also, we have Miss Natalya Lim, partner of PricewaterhouseCoopers, and she is the tax and advisory partner. Anvar Abdraev, who is the president of the Union of Kyrgyzstan Banks. We also have Mr. Olegzhan Beketayev, who is the managing director for marketing, PR, and ESG of Jusan Bank. And definitely a very close peer of mine, who is also participant of our panel discussion, is Garth Bedford, Senior Operations Officer, Climate Finance Lead, IFC Financial Institutions Group in Middle East, Central Asia, and Turkey. Also, I wanted to mention that we have an opportunity to participants to join us online. We have participants online in addition to the speakers. Your questions can be, let me read it. You can put it in the Telegram bot. Let me read it. Because, I'm not a really advanced user of Telegram, so my colleagues helped me to understand what is it about. And you can put your questions in Telegram, and your questions will be here. And in the end of the session, I will dedicate some time to the most interesting questions. And also, we are going to here it is. You can QR scan the Telegram bot on the screen. And also there are questions related to our study. There are 3 questions that we would like to bring for your attention. And the questions are: the Central Asian countries, do they actively promote ESG agenda? And it is also followed by business community interest. The second option is that Central Asian countries are not that much interested because they're just starting the path of ESG. And the last question of the survey is that in the current environment, ESG questions do not get required attention. You can vote now. And in the end of the session, we will try to understand which of the questions is the most relevant and the most acute. Well, let me jump to our panel discussion. And first of all, I would like to understand to what extent ESG agenda, or let me put it this way, to what extent we are ready to consider and promote this topic among business community and at the level of the regulator. Perhaps you know that Central Asian countries and countries of the globe experience the effects of climate change. And all of this is driven by the environmental pollution at many levels. This relates to production, consumption, and mainly The question is how we can reduce it, how we can reduce it in affordable and adequate way, how we can bring it down. This is the challenge that the business and the government have to address. Today, our participants, I hope they will have an opportunity to share their experience and their expertise and knowledge. What are we ready to commit for and what challenges we have? The first question I would like to ask to Peter Marro, I wanted to refer to you. Almost all of the countries in Central Asia have incorporated the ESG agenda into their priority vectors for development. How would you evaluate the perception and readiness for ESG among Central Asian countries? The floor is to you, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting me. Unfortunately, I cannot be personally in Kazakhstan, but certainly I'm very happy that this conference is taking place. I think it's a very timely event. It's also a very important event. ESG is really gaining traction around the globe and also particularly in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan. So I will do a short presentation touching on the questions that have been asked about ESG implementation in Central Asia and in Kazakhstan, showing a little bit the state of such implementation. Then I will talk a little bit about ADB's experience in this area, in not just Central Asia, but also in other parts of the region. And finally, touch on new technical assistance that ADB is just putting together as we speak to support actually the development and implementation of ESG factors and ecosystem in our countries. So Marian, if I can ask you to share the screen, we can start with the presentation, please. Okay, go to the first slide. So why is ESG relevant? I think all of us understand by now this is really not something that is just going to disappear. This is also not something that just happened overnight. It's been around for a long time, and it's really gaining a foothold in the mainstream financial markets. The evidence of that is that more than 2,000 financial institutions have signed the UN Principles for Responsible Investments. Among those signatories are some of the largest banks and financial players in the global markets, and also a number of such institutions from Central Asia. I think it really helps to push the financial sector to play a greater role in the transformation of the current economic model into a more sustainable one. I think we all understand that recent events such as the COVID pandemic, the climate change events, and the war in Ukraine have further highlighted the importance of social and governance factors. And I think we all understand that this is an urgent matter that needs to be taken up sooner the better. But also from a financial perspective, I think ESG is a good business, and this is also evidenced by the fact that global sustainable bond issuance have reached more than $1.1 trillion last year, and actually expected to surpass 1.5 trillion this year. So a tremendous jump from year to year, but in particular, I would say last 2-3 years have been really strong momentum in this investment category. And we expect this to continue in the future. Next slide, please. Here, a broad overview of ESG practices across Asia. At the outset, I want to emphasize that the level of implementation of ESGs really varies very dramatically in Asia. And there are some countries such as Japan really at the forefront internationally in the implementation. Other countries are lagging, and some of them have actually not even started really with thinking hard about the ESG implementation. But just to give you an example, in Japan, there's a strong increase in ESG coverage and investments from 2016 until 2020. there has been a 5 times increase of ESG assets, reaching $2.8 billion in 2020. One of the largest institutional investors in Japan is the Government Pension Investment Fund of Japan. That fund has over $1.6 trillion in ESG assets and has been an investor in this asset class since 2017. And obviously, through that role and through that significant contribution, it's making significant allocations to low carbon indices in Japan. The regulator also has played a very strong role. All Nikkei-listed companies have to comply with disclosure requirements aligned with the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. So there's a strong push, not just on the companies themselves, but also from the regulatory side to comply with disclosure requirements and basically be proactive rather than just sit and wait for this to be implemented. In other countries, like in Hong Kong and Singapore, the reporting obligation is a little bit different. It's not being enforced in the sense that everybody has to comply with it. But if you don't comply, then you have to explain to the regulator why you're not doing it. For instance, some companies might not be ready to do it. Some companies are too small and don't really have the resources to do it. But it clearly needs to be explained to regulators why this is not happening. And then other markets, again, in particular in China and India, the focus has been to get first the larger companies to comply. Again, the thinking behind is those companies have the resources to implement ESG practices in their operations, and then the smaller companies will follow that lead. In the region here, I would say Georgia is one of the leaders. The Central Bank of Georgia, the National Bank of Georgia, has been actually very instrumental in developing ESG guidelines and policies and is really leading that effort in the country. But as I said, not all major developed markets have addressed ESG disclosures fully. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges and obstacles? I would categorize it in two categories. One, on the external stakeholder side. The first one is really awareness. A lot of stakeholders, a lot of the public are not aware of ESGs and what it means and what are the possibilities to invest in such assets. Then even if the awareness is there, quite often the assets are not available. What we have seen is that greenwashing is prevalent. Greenwashing is really something that we see in many countries where companies basically issue green instruments, bonds or loans, where the underlying assets are not really that green, but clearly labeling it as green is very trendy these days, so they hope to attract more investors. Another problem is a lack of investment pipeline of projects. So if companies issue a bond and raise money from the markets, where are the projects actually to invest, the green projects? Then access to performance data is challenging, and also the lack of regulatory framework makes it very difficult to ensure that these assets are properly regulated and monitored. Finally, there's also a lack of relevant evaluation and verification agencies in our member countries. Those companies are very critical to give confidence to the investors that the assets are not just verified and assessed at the beginning of the investment, but throughout the life of the financial instrument. On the internal stakeholder side, there is a fear about green premium. A lot of investors, first question when they come to us is, do I have to pay more than if I would issue a traditional financial instrument? So balancing the long-term value creation with short-term financial requirements is always a big topic. I would say it's actually on the contrary. We have seen many green instruments being issued at lower rates than what would be possible by not doing it through the green route. But clearly there's also a need for a culture change. I mean, ESGs have to be tangible and meaningful for all employees, not just for the public, but also for the employees of the company. And then where to get the resources, where to get the assets from? Do we really have, as a company, do we really have such assets, green investments, green projects that can be packaged and used as basic collateral for, let's say, a green bond to be placed in the markets? And finally, the additional cost of compliance. So it's not just issuing the instrument, but also the monitoring, the reporting, the valuation, and so forth of these assets have to go throughout the life of that instrument. And that can add additional costs to the transaction. Next slide, please. What has been ADB's approach to sustainable financing? ADB has been at the forefront of the development of Asia's thematic bond markets. We have been issuing green bonds since 2015. Last year, we issued roughly 1.7 billion in green bonds, most of them in private placement format. And our treasury operations has been issuing bonds in a variety of currencies, as you can see here. All of the international currencies are there, but also Kazakhstan tenge. We have issued a bond in Kazakhstan tenge, and I will touch on that in a moment. In Ukrainian, hryvnia, Norwegian krone, and so forth. Then, apart from ADB issuing its own bonds, we also have our private sector operations department, very active in green finance area. They started in 2016 with the first green bond in Asia, in the Philippines, followed by a bond in Thailand. And then there were several other bonds. The last one was in Georgia. Actually, in 2020, we started in Georgia, and we just closed another transaction a few weeks ago in Georgia as well. And I will touch on this in a little bit more detailed. Marianne, next slide, please. When we talk about themed bonds, we're not just talking about green bonds. The ADB has also been active in other types of themed bonds, such as those related to water programs, to gender, to health and education projects, where we issued such themed bonds in the international markets, benefiting from our AAA rating that gives the highest confidence to investors to invest in such instruments. As of 7th of October 2022, total outstanding amount in this theme bonds has been roughly $17.7 billion. And in total, in green bonds, we have issued over $10 billion since 2015. In last year, we expanded our green bond framework to also include blue bonds. Blue bonds are those related to protection of water and in particular of the oceans. And we issued such a blue bond last year for a total of $301 million. Next slide. In Kazakhstan, we have been active in two transactions. Last year in February, we raised 8.4 billion Kazakh tenge from our first gender bond. This gender bond is related to a project that I have been processing. This is a $100 million loan that was given to the Housing and Construction Savings Bank of Kazakhstan, or Otbazi Bank as it is called now. And this is really to promote affordable residential mortgage loans for women borrowers in largely rural areas. So all the money will go to women who want to get a loan, get a mortgage from Otbazi Bank to buy an apartment or a small house, primarily in the rural areas of the country. This is the first time that Otbazi Bank has actually accessed any external borrowings. And it is also the first time that the Ministry of Finance has guaranteed such a loan that was issued by ADB. The bond that we issued in the market had a 10.15 semi-annual coupon and a 10-year bullet maturity. It was quite a long tenor. 10 years is quite exceptional for domestic markets. It had to be that long because housing finance, as we all know, requires long tenor products or instruments to basically finance the underlying mortgages. And it will be redeemed in December 2030. This bond is a new benchmark as the longest maturity local currency bond issued by any multilateral development bank in Kazakhstan. It was auctioned and listed on the stock exchange in Kazakhstan, and it was oversubscribed and sold primarily to domestic institutional investors. So it was a big success. I'm very happy with this transaction. And that's the reason why we actually followed up this year with another transaction for the same project, this time 14 billion tenge, for the second gender bond that will also be provided to Otbazi Bank to continue the program that has been going quite well. Next slide. In Georgia, we have been active. Now I think we have 4 green bonds that we have supported through our private sector colleagues. The first one was a 20 million bond. It was issued by Georgia Global Utilities Company. It was the first ever green bond issuance in the country. And our colleagues from the private sector group have invested 20 million in that instrument to support Global Utilities Company in its expansion of its operations. Recently, we have invested 4 million in Georgia's first locally listed green bond. So this bond is being listed on the Georgian Stock Exchange, and it is supporting the renewable power operations of Georgia for the financing of new renewable energy projects in the country. So we have supported these transactions through a variety of activities. The first is the formal and informal training on this debt instrument and its framework. Then we have helped to review the portfolio and identify eligible assets as well as schemes and sectors that can benefit from this investment type. We have helped develop a framework and a verification process. We have coordinated very closely with the verifiers to assist with the information collection. And we have also integrated the whole verification process with our safeguard due diligence audit. And finally, we helped with the annual reporting obligations that are required for this type of investments. Next slide, please. Two small case studies. The first one in the Philippines. In 2016, we invested an amount of $37 million as a direct loan to a project in the south of the Philippines. It's for a geothermal project of 380 megawatt capacity. The total investment amount was 225 million, of which we provided 37 million in a loan, and we also guaranteed 75% of the entire bond. So the entire 225 million was guaranteed by ADB up to a level of 75%. It was a very long tenor bond issuance, 10 years. And it was the first green bond issued in the Philippines. It was also the first bond in the Asia Pacific to receive the client bond certification. And it was the first client bond in an emerging market for a single project. So before, we always had bond issuance that had collateral of a whole portfolio of assets. This time it was a single project that benefited from the proceeds of this bond issue. And as you can see, we won a number of awards. So international recognition for this landmark transaction was very, very large. Next slide, please. The second case study is in Thailand. There we have invested in a bond issuance by a portfolio of solar projects. The bond was issued by Grim Power in Thailand. It was, again, a large bond issuance of $155 million. It had 2 tranches, one of 5 and one of 7 million. And ADB purchased the entire $5 billion baht of the bond issuance. This will enable the company to finance 9 operational solar plants and 7 solar plants that are under construction. Again, it's the first certified bond issuance that was issued in the country. And the hope is really to develop the green bond market in Thailand by showcasing international best practice and also help Thailand to achieve its targets for reducing green bond emissions by 20% by 2030. Next slide, please.
Peter.
This is my last slide. I just wanted to let you know that we are in the process of developing a new technical assistance. This technical assistance of $1.925 million is going to be operational, I would say, in December this year. And my colleague, Mr. Abhishek Hetke, is currently in the audience. He's in Kazakhstan, so he will be happy to answer any questions that you have in terms of accessing this technical assistance, because we are trying not just to promote green financing, ESG type of investment, but also support it through capacity building. So this TA has 3 pillars. One is to develop an ESG strategy, mobilizing experts, assessing the readiness of a particular company, benchmarking it against financial standards and benchmarks. and also assess the ESG risks that could be there, and create investor awareness. And then once we have that ESG strategy developed, then we will help in the transformation of the business itself, of the company, to really integrate ESG principles. We also support the evaluation of issuance of such financial instruments. And the ultimate goal would be that we can help companies in Kazakhstan to issue an ESG bond in the market. I think that will be really the verification of our work that it has been successful. And we will also provide technical capacity for institutional trainings, capacity building, enhance the knowledge, carry out workshops, and handhold the client on any such bond issuance. I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your time, and I'm available to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Peter, большое спасибо.
Peter, thank you so much for such an informative presentation. It's great to see that there are opportunities to raise and issue green bonds for long terms with very attractive financing rates, especially in local currencies. I see that states and countries adhere to ESG principles, and they do their best to promote them in reality and to provide financing for them, and they try and work in accordance with these principles. My next question is for Natalya. With what problems do companies deal when they are trying to develop these principles? Are there any difficulties, challenges? Are there any are they stimulated and motivated to promote and work under these principles? Thank you. Can you please put up my presentation? Colleagues, participants, thank you so much for joining us here, and thank you for the invitation. I do think this topic is very important. I would like to discuss now ESG problems and their development, the adherence to these principles in the corporate sector. I'm not going to talk about this bottleneck that we have. Obviously, we work in Eurasia, and we're connected with Mongolia and the Caucasus, and obviously the bottleneck here, the biggest problem is what is ESG and why do we need it? So I'm not going to deal with those questions. What I would like to say is the following. The problem that we face most of the time when we work with the corporate sector is the absence of a strategy where ESG is one of the driving forces for sustainable development. Companies have all sorts of initiatives and projects focusing on social and environmental areas, and they also have their own corporate strategies. And so this disconnection with the united concept, they have that problem, and companies usually struggle with identifying their goals and objectives and with sort of quantifying impacts that they face when they work. And some companies don't even know that they can also, apart from generating profit, they can also impact positively the environment. For example, a company can develop their own online service, they can train their employees, and so they don't understand that when working on all these issues, they do what? People don't have to waste their time. People then focus on their families and hobbies. And so this large amount of people don't have to drive to go grocery shopping or something. And that also all contributes to the fact that carbon emissions go down. I mean, one delivery can solve all these problems. You don't have to do everything yourself. And in your corporate strategy, the focus has always been on basically generating profit. The more the better. Now we are asked to develop other strategies focusing on other things. And so what's important here? If a company is prepared to take on certain obligations, or if a company has already developed its own ESG strategy. It's important to make sure that ESG is part of their corporate business strategy. And going forward, structural things, including KPIs, targets, timelines, etc., are also amended accordingly in light of this ESG component. So if a company wants to just generate profit and it focuses heavily on profit and returns, then such information that is not connected with financial indicators is not collected. And the second block of questions that companies have is the availability of financing. Green projects are basically about long-term things, and they're quite risky. To get financing, as our ADB colleague has said, you know that obviously financing is available in the market. It's provided by institutional investors, by commercial banks. But do we have this dialogue between those who want to work on green bonds and those who actually provide capital? So we think that this dialogue is the second problem, because there is no basically ideal dialogue, so to speak. And to be able to have this transparent communication between those who provide financing and those who need financing is, of course, the availability of financial statements that should be very detailed, so that investors are able to obtain all information that they need. Also, credit ratings are another factor. They are important, and on top of them, we have ESG ratings now, and it's also a great investor communications instrument. The third barrier that we have identified is corporate governance. ESG is not just about the environment, society, etc. We think that the G letter is one of the most important in that abbreviation, because that's the beginning of the right setup for your corporate culture in any company. If you communicate with companies in Central Asia, and obviously we are looking at it as the whole Eurasian space, so we would like to say the following. We observed that people who are responsible for ESG in companies, they usually do not have, and those are several people usually, they don't have the right or the authority to take or make any decisions. And we know that that process entails huge transformation in any company. And if we do want to change something, then corporate governance is very important. The board of directors, the management board, shareholders of that company should take ESG very seriously. They should make sure that these issues are on the agenda every day. And so those people who are involved in those issues in that organization, if they have it on their everyday agenda, only then will they be able to change something or to make positive changes. Because otherwise that will be just a tick-the-box thing, and nobody will take these issues seriously. What else would we like to point out? And what else did we observe when working with large companies in the region? One of the things that should be mentioned is integration. So here, in a simplified form, we would like to show you how to go through ESG integration process step by step. I've just talked about the importance of ESG and that it should be an integral part of any business strategy and that it should be one of the main driving forces. I also have said about corporate governance and its importance, and so statements and reports are also important. And now I would like to talk about evaluating the following. Companies must identify for themselves the most important environmental and social aspects that are, in their opinion, should be part of their obligations, so that their company can have a significant impact on environmental and social aspects of their work. What have we found? We have found that some companies struggle with identifying such aspects. Moreover, some companies identify too many, starting from human rights all the way through biodiversity, gender equality, etc. And that somehow is a problem, and they struggle with their resources. And so when companies are able to understand what is material, what is significant and essential for them, then they can come up with a very focused systemic approach. And that way they're able to focus on those aspects and tell everybody, look, these are our obligations, commitments. They also are able then to come up with their KPIs and stick to them. And they're also able to identify ESG risks, and then they can start minimizing them. Because here we should be talking about long-term development, and it's very important that companies are aware of all these things and understand them. Also, I would like to draw your attention to the following. This slide is very important for us. As I have said, ESG is perceived by the corporate sector as something that they just need to have, just to tick all those boxes. And this is not the modern, fashionable word that needs to be mentioned all the time. ESG is something that will help you to retain your employees, because this younger generation treats all these issues very differently. I mean, do you have water or not? If your business depends a lot on water, then you have to think about this in advance so as to ensure that you have reliable water supply. From that, your investments will depend and your exports will depend, because you may depend on one of suppliers from Europe. As you know, Europe is moving towards those goals and objectives faster than the rest of the world. Then your taxes will depend on that. They will be higher or lower. And in essence, ESG is at the center of long-term sustainable development of any business. And to conclude, I would like to say the following. I want to share our results with you. Disclosure of ESG information in Kazakhstan. We are in Kazakhstan right now because this country is focusing more than anybody else in this region on ESG. So as part of this project, I need to say that we're not looking at how people integrate all this. We're looking at the quality of information that Kazakhstani companies have as part of their statements and reports. About 20 companies show very good results in Kazakhstan in this respect. They are introducing ESG practices quite actively. They disclose in their documentation not only UN Sustainable Development Goals, but they also talk about equal career opportunities that they provide to their employees. They talk about responsibility. And they also come up with their financial statements in accordance with international standards such as GRI. But we also looked at a larger number of reports. I cannot remember how many exactly, what was the number of those reports that we have looked, but I need to say the following. The majority of companies are lagging behind in terms of ESG, and those problems that I have raised are very relevant for them. Despite the fact that in Kazakhstan, the mentality, the ESG culture and mentality are already there, there's still a lot of work to be done so that everybody is aware of the following. ESG is not just something nice to have or something that you need to do. This is something inevitable, something that you need to seriously think about. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Natalya, for very interesting presentation. It was so pleasant to hear that ESG is the central focus area for sustainable development. And this is something we have to pay attention to, because further on, well, at least if we do not pay attention, then it will be quite difficult for the company to develop, to attract new investments, and implement and market their products, both domestic and external markets. So we know that there are taxes being implemented, the border taxes, and they are implemented in accordance with ESG standards. Thank you very much. Indeed, it was very interesting discussion. Now, I would like to get Anvar join our conversation. He's coming from Kyrgyzstan, and I would like to find out, within the region we have numerous ESG initiatives being implemented. How do you manage implementation of such initiatives in Kyrgyzstan? What kind of challenges or issues you face, and what kind of projects have been implemented? The floor is to you, please. Thank you, Ekaterina. My patronymic is Karakev. You can just call me Mr. President because I'm the president of the union. Thank you, Mr. President. And, well, first of all, I would like to thank the facilitators of today's event. First of all, for inviting me and for beautiful facilitation of this event, for us to have a forum to sit here, to share our expertise, and to talk whatever concerns us and whatever problems or challenges that we unfortunately face. The ESG issue and the green economy, you know, we had a statement that this is something fashionable, this is something being in trend. However, it is catastrophic situation. We reached the point when we have to be serious about this. And it's not only about financial institutions dealing with it or the government dealing with it. We have to do it all together, because otherwise we will just lose our Earth. We will lose the planet, because otherwise we will end up with catastrophe. And this is why this has to be widely disseminated with major awareness campaigns, so everyone understands what kind of situation we are in. And this relates not only to financial sector, but to business, to the government. You know, I was invited to be the speaker for this event, but I ended up being the listener. I didn't do the I have a presentation, in fact, like three-pager. But I can share and leave my speaker notes so you can place it on the web resource. But I don't want to talk from the paper. You know, whatever I wanted to say was already raised and was already discussed. What is ESG? What are the ESG principles? How the taxonomy shall be implemented? Where do we need to integrate? What funds are available? I think I'm not going to say anything new, especially taking into account that Kyrgyzstan experience is not that much significant, so we can share the examples. I would like just to comment some of the speeches made today and just maybe share some of my considerations on which which direction we need to pursue. The first one, that it was very rightly mentioned by Mr. Sagantayev, that we talk a lot about ESG, about green economy, especially in Kazakhstan. We have so many talks, but not that widely talked about in other regions. I said that in Kyrgyzstan we also talk, but unfortunately we don't do a lot. And this is the situation that is there, that we are facing. I woke up early in the morning and I decided to make a very nice walk in the city of Almaty, just to walk around, to witness and to how the government contributes to environmental challenges. It's not that I am the guest who wants to share beautiful words, but I was surprised. I walked through the major highways of Almaty with severe traffic jams. Well, I felt like in a forest. What does this mean? It means that the government is seriously concerned with the fuel combustion and fuel issues in the city of Almaty. And I think it's not only about the city of Almaty, but Almaty region as well. For our country, this is a major challenge, especially in winter time. What I have observed is the outcome of cooperation of the government with the banking sector and other economy sectors that have jointly contributed to the replacement of conventional vehicles with the electric ones. And this issue, by the way, is successfully addressed in Mongolia. You know what was the before situation in Ulaanbaatar and what is the after situation now. And this is a very interesting experience that actually motivated me. And I think that the urban planning and urban development issues are also well set up in Almaty. You have you have a metro, like not the metro, but the underground metro. And you know that the officials in many countries, they do not pay so much attention, but Almaty is different. And what we observe today is the outcomes of significant efforts to save the Earth, to save the planet. What do we need to do? Let me share a small experience of mine. The Union of Banks and the banking sector, in fact, represents the major information portal for Kyrgyzstan that calls and urges to act in these directions. The government heard us, the business heard us, the banking sector was responsive as well, and well, anyone who wanted to hear the message did hear the message. So according and in response to our proposals, the country development plan and the government action plan have incorporated the establishment of the Green Finance Corporation, where the major implementing party would be the Union of Kyrgyzstan banks. This will imply engagement of all of the banks, and some role and functions are also given to the government. Secondly, we finalized the establishment of the interdisciplinary commission at the level of the government that is going to be chaired by the first prime minister with engagement of the private sector and all of the relevant ministries and agencies to come up with the single government policy that will implement ESG. I think these are quite significant contributions to ESG. By the way, I am the deputy chairman of this commission, of this interdisciplinary commission. What else? As I have already mentioned, during last 5 and 6 years, we have had numerous events, lots of discussions. Just yesterday, we finalized international forum as supported by IFC, UNDP, and other IFIs. And sometimes I end up with an impression that all of the business projects are more have higher demand from IFIs, but not from the government, because they pursue all of these events, they drive them forward. And during last 5 years, we had something around 20 or so events, international events, which were meaningful, which were valuable, that have contributed to further development. The outcomes. So, the day after tomorrow, the bank is going to issue the first gender bonds. By the way, we have the representative of our stock exchange, and he can provide you with details. Also, by the year end, we are planning to issue green bonds by one of our commercial banks. And I think that we will not stop here. We will continue. As for the taxonomy agenda, this is indeed a very serious problem for our country. However, taxonomy cannot be developed by business itself with no input from the government. So maybe the interdisciplinary commission that we have established can contribute to the development of the taxonomy. And we also need to engage the community, the society. In addition, we have applied significant efforts to establish this Green Finance Corporation. We are now planning to legalize it. We had one issue. We decided to follow Mongolia's experience. And by the way, they have very valuable experience. We have made a side trip of our bankers and public officials, national banks officials to Mongolia. And I forgot to mention one thing. We had a regulator during the panel session, Madina from national regulator in Kazakhstan. And I can say that NBK has contributed significantly, and they have a lot to share. And we need to seek for their expertise. So I can say that Mongolia also does have a very good breakthroughs in this field, especially financial corporations. They have financial corporation in Mongolia, but they didn't accredit it in the Green Climate Fund, but they have just trained and they have prepared another bank. So we want to follow their path. One of our banks is already ready for such accreditation, and I think that we will manage to complete the stage. It isn't my intention not to share the amounts, bonds, assets, because they may confuse you. You know, you may find them big ones, you may find them small ones, but it is reflective of economy's current status. And I believe that whatever is done by the banking sector is sufficient to reflect our current progress. Once again, I said it in the beginning that this process of saving the earth has to be supported by all parties. However, just Kazakhstan alone or Kyrgyzstan alone, EAC, Eurasian Economic Union alone, cannot address the issue. The entire globe has to stand together to protect. It has to be a very comprehensive approach, global approach to all of these events. Otherwise, we will not be able to save anything, and we will end up with catastrophe. I don't want to make this my wrap up, and I truly think that we can resolve all of this. But I have to convey this message. Another message I would like to have would be to IFIs. Unfortunately, the procedures like accreditation, resource allocation, this is something that requires simplification, to my opinion, because we are spending a lot of time. All of these investments and all of these credits, they are not profit-making, right? They are not profit capable. They are finance capable, but they are not profitable. So it means that the business and commercial sector is not that much interested. So maybe we need to simplify the procedure side. And we have to be very responsive and very prompt to the needs of business, to the needs of financial sector, to incentivize them to participate. What else? Indeed, it's a great event, and I'm so glad to be part of it. I'm glad for visiting this event. There was another statement today within the scope of Eurasian Economic Union umbrella. Recently, we have established the Union of Turk-speaking countries. We will be also having a range of events. Maybe Turkey can also join, though Turkey does not have ESG agenda that much developed as, for instance, compared to Kazakhstan. But I think that this kind of events are needed because they bring value to all of us. I'm leaving the event with a huge package of knowledge and expertise. If you are interested in my presentation, I'm leaving it to the facilitators and you can get access to it. Thank you. Thank you very much for such an interesting and very intense presentation and message. When you started talking, I had a feeling, like I received some very good and positive energy. However, the issues that you raise, they're not positive, in fact, and they're not easy to address. It's very nice to hear that Kyrgyzstan stands ready to learn, to implement these ESG standards in their country. And they are also ready to share the lessons that they are learning from other states and to share their personal experience from Central Asia. And they are ready to share it global-wide. Now I would like to give the floor to Garth and have a kind of tricky question, we are currently in Kazakhstan, and I would like to ask, what is the potential or capacity of Kazakhstan in terms of attracting finance in compliance with ESG standards? Garth, the floor is to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, we have a big countdown clock here. I feel like I'm in a game show. I hope I'll try and finish on time. I don't know what happens when it gets down to zero, but
Гарт, я хотела бы немножечко расширить свой вопрос, да? Вы хотите...
Let me expand my question. Of course, you want to stay in our timing limits, but what kind of financing tools you have to support sustainable development? What kind of opportunities are there with the ESG instruments that business can utilize for their financing?
Thanks. So indeed, I'm not as eloquent as our previous speakers, so I have a presentation to distract you a little bit. Look, IFC has been working in this space. We were one of the original IFIs to start developing an approach to green finance. We've been doing green bonds for as long as I've been with IFC. And it's something that we continue to take seriously. And right now, as you can see, approximately 70% of our clients are already doing green finance. And it's something that we expect to hit 100% by 2025. And it won't be, as long as alongside our fellow IFIs and DFIs, I think most of us, it's going to be a requirement. So I will be discussing sort of a subset of ESG, specifically the environment and specifically climate finance. And so when I say that most of our banks are already doing climate finance, probably more are doing it than they realize. And so it's also a sense that these are the ones who are actually, targeting it, the ones that are actually able to measure what they're doing and actually able to come back with a reporting on exactly what they're doing. So it probably realistically is higher than 70%. But as you can see, most of it is around the usual suspects, the renewable energy, energy efficiency, those which we see as the obvious path to mitigation to try and replace our fossil fuels, etc., with renewable energy, and to try and make sure what we're already using, we're using more efficiently. But there are a wide range of areas that fit under climate finance. And it's something which, when we're working with governments, when we're working with banks to try and really clarify what actually does this mean? Where does climate finance fit? And what sort of guidelines do we need to try and put in place at a national level, even at a global level, which allows financial institutions to say, yes, this fits under the category of climate finance. But one thing to sort of focus on here is one area where we start to realize that we're not putting enough energy in, and that's adaptation. And it comes down to a little bit of what we look at as what are the real risks out there on the financial institutions? What risks are we facing as industry? And it is that we are probably not going to hit our targets, right? So we're going to have this 1.5% increase. We're already seeing floods in Pakistan. We're seeing droughts. We're seeing a lot of results of climate already hitting us. So it's going to affect the portfolios of our institutions. So when we say adaptation, even in Paris alignment, we are looking at, we should be putting around 40% of our efforts on, let's say, wealthier countries to support adaptation. And even within our institutions we work with, is what are they doing to make sure that their clients are ready 5-10 years down the road to adapt to the new environment, And is your portfolio going to be factually addressing this? So is your portfolio, is your institution as strong as you think it is? So in developing this, whether this is the right mix, I don't know. I do know that we have done a lot of studies here in Kazakhstan, and areas such as transport and green buildings have come out as key areas that should be focused on in Kazakhstan. And it's something where not enough is probably being done. And how do we support institutions to have an approach to actually lending to green buildings, lending to electric or hybrid vehicles, along with the more traditional approaches towards renewable energy and adaptation. But as we've heard from other speakers, the key is profitability. If you can't do it and do it profitably, nobody wants to be the first one to jump into this sector. But as we see up here, really it is at least as profitable, if not more profitable, to work in climate finance. Sometimes there are some obstacles. It maybe takes a little bit more effort, but the portfolio is more resistant. And in fact, as an institution, as I say, if you do it correctly, you should find your profitability to be, if anything, better than your traditional portfolio. So there's a bit, as we've, I think, heard in some other sessions, sort of a carrot and a stick approach. I mean, the carrot is, it is profitable, and the stick is, if you don't do it, you won't be able to access financing from IFIs or other agencies who we expect you to be 100% of our clients to be at least doing something in the area of climate finance. So specifically in Kazakhstan, there are some challenges to actually really trying to expand climate finance. We have seen that there's a few financial institutions doing small pieces, but there is no one institution leading the way. There's nobody actually taking a real deep dive into this area. We have been working with several banks to try and help them develop this. And one of the issues is, of course, there just isn't any knowledge base. Nobody's done it here. This is a new area. How exactly do you develop your products? How exactly do you measure the impact? What is green financing? What fits within the taxonomy? So really bringing in that knowledge is our first area that we're focusing on, and working with several banks to do this and helping develop a strategy. Because if we look at the banks, some banks found this was a failure, and the ones that we have looked at that did not make money doing this did not have a strategy. So as with everything, whether you're trying to do digital banking, whether you're trying to do any other specific sector, you need a strategy to enter climate finance and a strategy to do it correctly. And poor planning leads to poor performance, as they say. And lastly, we need to support our clients to actually become Paris-aligned. As I say, by the end of mid-2023, we will expect 85% of our investments to be Paris-aligned. By the end of 2025, 100%. And by Paris-aligned, again, this is something that we need to make sure that there is a common understanding what makes a financial institution Paris-aligned and what type of loan actually fits into this category. So, I mean, for Paris alignment, a lot of banks are already there by definition, but there needs to be a clear focus on how this actually happens. So I think there's a lot of work to do at the institutional level to actually understand and develop a climate finance portfolio, and doing it which is sustainable. And one thing I mentioned is, how do you actually measure it? And I will speak to this a bit more later, but having the tools to measure, are we actually doing what we say we're doing? We're not greenwashing, we're not just pretending it is climate finance, but we're actually making an impact. And also working on the demand side. I mean, right now, perhaps because of the lack of incentives, perhaps for other reasons, nobody seems to have a clear understanding where the demand for this is coming from. So we have done a study. We have seen, as I mentioned, there's certain areas where there's a clear demand, but there still needs work to be done to try and really work at the beneficiary level to transmit the understanding of why they need to actually focus on green buildings or electric cars. I mean, what is the business case for getting this done and building the demand? The other area that we work on is climate risk, which goes back a bit to the adaptation piece. How do you, as an institution, integrate climate risk into your general risk management practices? So clearly, if you're lending for a loan for 10 years, you want to understand in 10 years' time, is climate actually going to affect the results of this loan? So it fits in with every other type of risk you're looking at, repayment risk, et cetera. So there needs to be a common understanding of how do you integrate climate risk into your underwriting procedures, but also in stress testing your own institution. Are we actually adapting to climate change? Is the portfolio or is the institution we're running going to be as strong 5 years from now as it is today, and having the capacity to do that? And lastly, and I think, when I hear from our partners in the region, how do we access funding for climate finance? Is it going to be beneficial? And I think this is something that we're working on, a lot of other institutions are working on. How do you make sure that there is some incentive, there is beneficial pricing if you as an institution make the effort to ensure that we are addressing climate finance, you're addressing the development of a climate portfolio and doing it correctly, because it does lower the risk of the actual investment from our side. So this lessened risk should result, I would hope, in access to more concessional funding. And the last area on the funding side, we're doing a lot of work, and we've already heard it from a few speakers, is really looking at the capital markets. We're working with the stock exchange here. We're working with several institutions in the region to issue green bonds, to issue blue bonds. And I keep hearing about the water stress in the region, and certainly blue bonds will be something which are going to be of interest in this area. And what can we do to try and really focus on lessening the water stress in Kazakhstan, in the region? Oh, down to 2 minutes. All right, here I go. So what are we doing? We look at it in 3 different ways. I mean, one, we're working with the regulators here on trying to develop the taxonomy. And by this, again, I mean, what are the guidelines? What do we mean by green finance? Is the guidelines in Kazakhstan in line with EU, with IFC, with EBRD guidelines? Can this all be considered to be green lending? And what does that mean? We're also developing with the regulators ESG frameworks and working, as I say, on the principles and frameworks for green, blue, sustainable bonds. We're supporting banks and microfinance institutions and leasing companies to actually develop the skills to not just lend green, but understanding what is green in their current portfolio. Until you know what you're already doing this green, it's hard to really look at how to move forward. And also developing, as I say, capacity to understand climate risk. And one thing we've recently started in the region is the Green Banking Academy, and this is open to everybody. This is sort of a monthly discussion on very specific areas of climate finance, be it green supply chain finance, green trade, but different products or different approaches to climate finance. And as I mentioned, helping to develop the demand side. Unless there is a demand, it's very difficult to ask banks and other institutions to develop a product where the demand doesn't exist. So as I mentioned, we've done sort of a mapping of the demand. We're already looking at some of the value chains and seeing where exactly should institutions be focusing. So I'll finish up by just quickly mentioning two of the tools we're working to bring in to Kazakhstan. One is the EDGE tool, which is, let's say, a bit less expensive, but still internationally accepted green building certification. And this, especially as developing green building tools in Kazakhstan, this is a way to certify that, in fact, these buildings are green, but also allowing financial institutions to develop green mortgage products, which are automatically certified as green. So it allows, again, to assure there's no greenwashing, et cetera. And lastly, we have what we call a CAFE tool, which allows institutions to really ensure that they understand what the impact of what they're doing is. So they can actually measure what is the carbon sequestration, measure what exactly the impact of the particular loans are. All right, thank you very much.
Garth, thank you so much. From your presentation and from the presentations of our previous speakers, I understand now that the demand for these standards and green financing will be huge, because not a single financial institute and then consultants are also saying that very soon projects that will not be in compliance with ESG green standards will not be funded anymore. And hopefully that will be a driving force for all the development on an individual level and in the corporate sector. Right now we're talking about the corporate sector, but obviously everybody now is thinking about what I personally am doing so as to live in accordance, so to speak, with these ESG standards in my private life. So my next question is for Olegzhan Beketayev. What are the prospects in the Kazakh market in terms of financial projects? How will they be sort of correlated with ESG standards? Thank you, colleagues. You see, we are already ESG compliant because here green is the dominating color. Guys, out of all who are present today, who is involved very closely in ESG? Who is familiar with this issue? Oh, great. Half of the audience are aware of this and know what that is. But just to give you, again, for those who are not sure, to give like a general idea, ESG basically consists of these three separate letters, and you are basically judged, so to speak, or your performance is evaluated in accordance of all these ESG letters. So allow me to be a little bit pessimistic at the beginning. I personally am not completely sure that actually businesses understand why I should get involved in ESG. And our colleagues have already said that if ESG are not sure what the value is of all that, then businesses will not change the way they operate, especially if they don't know what they're required to do. Previously, I worked in a building company, in a construction company. That was a great company. And so we went to Germany to build a house. And there we learned that if you build an energy efficient house, if you let your people leave at 5 p.m., then you will get a loan at 2%. And if you do not comply with these requirements, your rate will be 8% from the bank. And then businesses get interested. They understand that they will be able to save on those 6%, the difference of on the difference. And so you need to tell businesses, you will get this, this, and this. And they always ask, who came first, the chicken or the egg? So here we should be asking, is the demand more important or something else is more important? And then Peter Duka, you remember, he said a few words about culture, and I do believe that in large companies, in small companies, if they do not have this ESG culture, and I think Natalya was right in saying that if it's not if it's not the top-down approach, if the manager, the leader doesn't understand what ESG needs, then the company will struggle. So the first area is you've got to demonstrate that there is the real value. And the second point is the culture. You need to have the culture, because otherwise you will go to a bank, you will get this scoring card, and then you will say, okay, I will start lending. And then governance, we said, is 50% of your rating. If, say, a bank or a company doesn't have this decision-making culture, if they don't have, I don't know, they're not aware of gender equality, then ESG culture will not be developed there. So you need to adopt a systemic approach here. And thirdly, why I am a little bit doubtful is, of course, the stick thing. Without any regulatory framework or limitations imposed by the government, we will struggle. Obviously, you can show the businesses, look, you will get cheap loans and it'll be great. But if you don't do that, you will be taxed, you will have penalties to pay, etc., etc. So all those 3 points I will try and cover in my talk. And again, I'll repeat the stick situation. It's dangerous. If you do not create the first two things, I mean, when businesses are interested and motivated, and then there is the culture, then greenwashing will become very dangerous, because when people do not understand what they're doing, they will come up with various schemes as to how to circumvent all this. And that's dangerous, because if you impose this ESG agenda on everybody too fast, that'll be dangerous. If you don't explain what advantages companies will get from that agenda. And in Kazakhstan, I'm sure there is this huge potential, ESG potential, in financing. First of all, the government leads the way. We meet with IFR twice a week, and financial institutions are now obligated to pay more attention to ESG. So if there is this push, then things will go or move forward faster. If you take a look at any forum in Kazakhstan, everybody is discussing ESG, and I think Kazakhstan for the next 10 years is trying to achieve their carbon emissions targets. Also, another push or additional push is the following. The Silkway heritage that we have means that we are at this crossroads between the East and Europe. And so our Western partners very soon will stop working with us if we are not ESG compliant. And again, for businesses, that is a new sort of approach. If we do not or are not ESG compliant, if we don't comply with European standards, then some companies in Kazakhstan will basically lose their businesses, so to speak. Hopefully that will be an additional push for everyone. As for banks, if we look at the West and their practices, then we will see that banks are like aggregators of sorts. Programs will be developed by the government to make cheap money available. There will be UN programs developed. So how will businesses get these funds? Obviously only through banks. And so banks now should formulate the right risk culture. They need to correctly evaluate their borrowers from ESG standpoints. And obviously banks need to learn how to deal with their carbon footprints. So only when banks are ready, the market will be able to obtain this access to cheap money. Now, in Kazakhstan, we don't have too many instruments of that kind. We had Otbasi Bank, and I'm sure you saw their advertising recently. You buy an electric car, and then you have 10% back. So those are the beginnings, so to speak, of those products. But if banks are not ready, if they don't understand how to correctly evaluate their borrowers and what their profits will be, then those funds, those monies will be difficult to access.
And I believe that the bank's role is that essential, and this is why perhaps the regulator is making it stringent for the banks. And Natalya shared that out of top 10, this would be the recovery. It's not because they're cool, it's because the requirements are very much stringent. They have to follow ESG. For financial institutions, that would be stage 2. Just we need to understand that we don't have a bank that would not aspire for IPO. Just for your understanding, IPO would not be possible without ESG rating or structured performance. It's not possible. It's all about, it's final. And this is why the banks will be moving towards the development, and the banks will act as some pusher for our economy, for our business, as when we talk about ESG agenda. Talking about Jusan, I understand that your data is dated 2022, because in 2021 we were one of few banks who have issued GDI reporting related to sustainable development. I invite you to visit the website and look through the data, and you can understand how transparent business can be. How can it be transparent in all dimensions, and the client can select which partner to go with. It's not about the rate, plus or minus 1%. It's the same rate in all of the banks, but you can select the partner who follows ESG principles. And this is a very simple story. You can support the bank that is close to you in terms of values. And when we talk about ESG, first of all, it is about banks reporting, so one can understand to what extent the financial institution proceeds with in-house monitoring. Second, you need to calculate the carbon footprint. Once again, when we compare it to European economy, it's different because we are coal-fired, and our carbon footprint is essential. So carbon footprint reduction would be our next focus area. And this is something that has to be there in each financial institution's planning. So when we talk about ESG, this is also about SME support. This would be a key factor on how the financial institution can support ESG. Education and training programs. Perhaps you know that UN SDG is also about the education, and this will help us to make another step towards ESG. Today we said that the world is now somewhere at the border. And a couple of days ago, I've read that supercomputers said that the Earth will end in 2050. And this is all we have, that we have already exceeded the limit. Well, we can believe it or not, but the question is, how are we going to treat it? Because ESG, it's not only about major companies or major business. This is something about your perception, about your way of thinking, about you utilizing it. So I'm absolutely confident that when we talk about, when everyone will share the volumes and will boycott the companies that do not follow ESG, only under these particular conditions we will be able to change the market quite quickly. Because it's not the game of a single institution or a single person, because we need to enhance penetration of knowledge into the mass society. Ekaterina, this would be my answer. Unfortunately, I don't have accurate financial performance data. I know that I'm threatened with pessimistic perception. My message is that we cannot push or force the entities to apply ESG. We need to incentivize them, to motivate, because otherwise we will end up with greenwashing. Thank you very much for this very bright presentation. Though you are talking about pessimistic things, but in a very enthusiastic way. So what I've heard from your presentation that this is about penalty and about incentives. Both tools have to be there altogether. And summarizing your presentation, I came up to the conclusion that penalty perhaps would be the role of the government, that will be imposing some restrictions, some regulations, and will be guiding the path. Also, this would be the role of investors, who will be telling what we invest into and what we do not, what kind of products what kind of products will be demanded and which will be not. The third penalizing party would be our partners, who would be either buying or not buying the products that are manufactured not in compliance with ESG, and the companies will have to adopt. So I can bring the analog of the carrot and the stick. So the stick would be with government, with the investors, with the regulators, while the carrot would be the investors who would be providing you with the cheaper money for the longer term. And eventually, this will guide the companies. We call it the guiding force. Our ESG standards are not something final or stable. They are changing from time to time. And the list that we believe is well positioned, we may end up working on a brand new list. I think that everyone in the room would think of the fact that we live on the same planet. We breathe the same air. And we all face the disasters, the natural disasters that require quite significant financial investments, and not by the government that has gone through the crisis, but from everyone in order to help to overcome. Talking about our health, we are seeing new diseases, and this imposes additional pressure on healthcare system, on the medicine systems, the studies that are required, and all of this results in cost escalation. Based on the questions that I have received today, we have to start wrapping up, and I would like to bring two questions. The question to the first two speakers, and Peter, can you hear us? Maybe this can be a question to you, to Natalya, and to our Mr. President. The question is, what shall the government start with? What kind of first two steps are needed that have to be done today? We know that there are lots of steps that we need to implement, but what kind of two steps can be done today towards ESG agenda? Peter, if you can hear us, can we start with you?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Да, мы вас слышим.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, I think there are many steps that the government has to do. I think it's not just limited to one or two, and I think all of those steps have to really interlink with each other and supplement each other. But I think, as I touched in my presentation, one of the main issues is really the awareness for ESGs. And it's not just the financial sector, it's not just the government, but it's really the wider public that needs to really grasp the importance of this topic and also basically support it in all of the things we are doing. I mean, we talked in this session also about green financing, green projects. I mean, it starts at home. I mean, replace all the old bulbs in the house with LED bulbs, with efficient bulbs. Maybe put a solar panel on the roof of the house if it's possible. Build the house according to green standards. So all of these relatively small steps can really make a long way to mainstream ESG principles into the society, into a wider sector. So I would say that's basically the number one step that I would think. And the government can support that through information campaigns, through providing incentives in terms of rebates or tax reductions that will be available. So there's a number of measures and possibilities that will be available. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Питер. Я думаю...
Thank you very much, Peter. I think you are now in Switzerland, right? And I know that your government is paying a lot of attention to these standards. In particular, the starting from yourself. When you place the batteries into a regular dustbin, but not to the special container, you will receive notification, then fine, and then you will be invited some special training where you will have to pay and attend 3 days training just leave your job and attend this 3 days training on how to properly dispose the batteries and why. So this kind of initiatives, I think they are very valuable. They help the government to increase awareness of population, how to start from oneself, from yourself. Thank you very much, Peter. The floor is to Natalya. Thank you, Ekaterina. Indeed, this is a very important question, and each country is undergoing its path. There are rich countries that can afford allocating essential budget to change the behaviors and create culture. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that developing countries don't have to do it. But I think that a very good driver for progress in ESG agenda would be low carbon strategy of the country. And such strategies shall be very correct one. Because what is low carbon development? There are various paths to reduce carbon. We have major energy companies, we have population that need to be protected. But taking the example of Kazakhstan, I would like to point that we don't have universal approach, and we shouldn't, because if we will be protecting only individual types of population, well, you see, this would be not fair. For instance, tariff policy. We can play the tariff policy. We know that population consume only 20% of total power consumed by the country. Maybe we shall introduce some special tariffs for major industrial companies, but protect population. So this kind of approach, it has to be very selective. And I believe that in the country-based low-carbon strategy will contribute to breakthrough, and this is something that Central Asian countries have to do, and I'm seeing very good progress from Uzbekistan. We also received requests from Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan companies, but we see that these companies are not ready to commit at the national level. Indeed, Mongolia has introduced a framework for ESG disclosure, which is a very good sign. And we truly hope that each country will significantly commit, and will start with a low carbon strategy. Thank you. Thank you. You see, it's very simple. I think there must be professional understanding of the problem by the officials, not the high-level officials. High-level officials understand. Our president understands. The chairman of the minister's cabinet understands. But the medium-tier officials, those who are responsible for monitoring, for training, have to be professionally educated, and they have to be driven by their heart. It shall not be bureaucratic official approach, because it prevents our country from doing some serious commitments. The business is ready. I think my colleague already said that the banks will not always pursue such agenda, but the government can lead. And we need to push the government so they coordinate the efforts of all of the public agencies to address this catastrophic issue. This is the main point. All we need to do is to take ownership over the actions one has to do. Let me give the example. 5 years ago, I was visiting one of the conference by Green Climate Fund. And we have an authorized agency represented by 5 individuals, 2 days conference. They visit the conference. So 4 people are shopping, 1 person is visiting the conference. They have no idea what the conference is about. So I think that this is about corruption fight. You know, we have to reinforce the problem is serious. And I think business and the banking sector needs to put efforts and to make the government respond to these challenges. We are ready to reinforce the requirements. I've mentioned the earlier the National Bank of Kazakhstan. You know, perhaps I'm abusing my time when I talk about the national banks, but anyways, I think that we have to start with ourselves. So your recommendation is to have less shopping to by our officials. Okay, let them do green shopping then. Garth and Olegzhan, my question is to you. What kind of baby steps are needed to be done by corporations to make themselves closer to ESG agenda? What kind of 2 steps? Garth, the floor is to you.
Yeah, I mean, I will speak from the banking sector because this is where my knowledge is. And I think the first step is to make doing green lending as easy as doing plain vanilla lending, to make it as simple if somebody comes in to be able to say, if we're going to do this as a climate finance, it's not going to be a huge extra effort on anybody's part. So to put in the right systems and processes to make this a fairly smooth transition. And the other is, it's a cultural shift, right? So it's not just somebody at the supervisory board saying now 30% of our portfolio is going to be green, but actually doing it from bottom up, where the staff and the employees actually put this into their DNA, that this is part of what they want to be, this is part of their institution, is to actually look at ESG as part of the day-to-day business. I think there's been too many times where it's a bit more of a directive and nobody buys into it. They don't understand how it's done. So it is a mindset change, and it does take training, and it does take time for people to say, yes, this is part of our new way of doing things. So I think there's a lot of baby steps, but I think, a big part of it is, as I say, just reorienting the way of work.
Спасибо, Гарth. Olegzhan, вам слово.
Thank you, Garth. Olegzhan, the floor is to you. You see, the banks, similar to any other companies, they have to do the same steps. Objectively, we don't know what ESG is, and we need to have some inception workshop with the training what ESG is, and we need to invite high-level officials. High-level officials have understanding, but the companies do not always have. Secondly, we need to have audits of our companies, where we stay now, what we are missing, and what we have. Maybe not the carbon footprint, because we don't know what carbon footprint is. We need to understand at which stage we are in terms of knowledge. Third, it's a very good exercise. It's like not putting your knowledge on the shelf, but make some report. Maybe sustainability development report or green development report. I understand that this can be only applied to major companies, but this would be the very right story that will help you to identify your weaknesses and strengths. And if you don't have subject matter experts in this field, just hire consultants. They are available in Kazakhstan. They are strong. They are wonderful experts. Do not try to do it alone. It may look to you like something very easy. It's not. It's a very time-consuming, effort-consuming job. So do not make these mistakes. And this is our another last baby step for us. We have requested to have S&P assessment. We have procured it. So we want to understand where we stand. This would be our final baby step. Further on, we will be drawing the plans. We will be drafting the plans how to become better, how to improve ourselves. We are abusing our time. But anyways, to support what we have discussed, our polling says that countries of the regions are not sufficiently active to ESG topic. ESG topic and the ESG agenda in Central Asia is just emerging. So we have understanding, we have baby steps, we have strategic steps. Anyways, I would like to thank all of the participants for such an interesting discussion, and thanks to the participants. I know that we made you stay, but you stayed, and you had an opportunity to listen to such an interesting and meaningful discussions. Thank you.